Ma'am, I need proof of residency. Now.
I'm a U.S. citizen. What legal authority are you detaining me under?
Your attitude just gave me probable cause. Step out of the vehicle.
You're violating my constitutional rights, and this camera is recording everything.
The hum of her car's air conditioning was a quiet, steady companion on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Alana Bennett, 48 years old and a pharmacist with a reputation for meticulous care and a warm heart, sat patiently in the CVS drive-through lane in her comfortable sedan. The Texas sun beat down on the pavement, but inside her car it was cool and calm. She was waiting for a simple prescription refill, a moment of mundane routine in a life dedicated to the complex science of medicine. She could see the pharmacy tech through the window moving with a familiar efficiency. In another 60 seconds, she'd have her medication and be on her way home. But she would never make it home on time. The first sign that her day was about to shatter into a million pieces was the black, unmarked SUV that pulled up at an aggressive angle, completely blocking her exit. It was a move of calculated intimidation. Before she could even process the maneuver, two men were emerging from the vehicle. They were dressed in dark tactical vests with the word ICE emblazoned in bold white letters across their chests. They moved with a purpose that made the back of Alana's neck prickle. The lead agent, a man in his early 30s with a buzz cut and a jaw set like concrete, strode directly to her driver's side window. The other agent, slightly older and with a more passive demeanor, hung back, creating a perimeter of authority. Alana's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but 2 decades spent dealing with life-and-death prescriptions had forged an unshakable composure. She took a slow, deliberate breath and watched the lead agent approach. He didn't knock. He slapped the glass with his open palm, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet of her car. "Ma'am, roll down your window," he commanded, his voice muffled but clear in its hostility. Alana complied, the electric whir of the window seeming deafeningly loud. The dry, hot Texas air flooded the car. The agent leaned down, his face uncomfortably close. His name tag read Thorn. "I need to see your papers. Your proof of residency. Now." Alana looked from his hard, accusing eyes to his partner, who stood with his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm. This was not a request. It was a threat. Her mind, trained to analyze and assess, kicked into high gear. This was a seizure under the Fourth Amendment. She was being detained. "With all due respect, officer," she began, her voice even and professional, "may I ask what the legal basis is for this stop? I am a U.S. citizen, and I'm just waiting to pick up a prescription." Agent Thorne's eyes narrowed. He clearly wasn't accustomed to being questioned. He seemed to take her calm, articulate response not as the words of a law-abiding citizen, but as a challenge. "I'm not an officer. I'm a federal agent. And the legal basis is that I'm conducting an investigation. Now, are you going to show me your papers, or are we going to do this the hard way?" The threat was no longer veiled. Alana knew that arguing with a man like this in a parking lot was a dangerous proposition. She made a calculated decision to comply while still asserting her rights. "I'm happy to provide you with my identification," she said, moving her hands slowly and deliberately. "I am reaching into my purse now for my wallet." She retrieved her Texas driver's license and, for good measure, her state-issued pharmacist license, both showing her full name photograph and a local address she'd lived at for 15 years. She handed them to Thorne. He snatched the licenses from her hand and glanced at them with dismissive contempt. "These don't prove you're a citizen," he scoffed. "They hand these out to anyone. They could be fakes." The absurdity of the statement was breathtaking. The state of Texas did not, in fact, hand out pharmacy licenses to anyone. It required years of advanced education, rigorous background checks, and federal DEA clearance. "Agent Thorne," Alana said, her patience wearing thin, but her voice remaining level. "That is my valid state-issued driver's license, and that is my professional license to practice pharmacy. My fingerprints are on file with both the state and the federal government. I assure you they are not fake." Her refusal to become flustered seemed to pour gasoline on the fire of his aggression. He saw her composure as defiance. He had expected fear, maybe tears. He got a calm, intelligent woman who knew her rights, and he couldn't stand it. "Your uncooperative attitude is giving me probable cause to detain you for further questioning," he declared, the legal term sounding ridiculous in the context of the CVS parking lot. From inside the pharmacy, the tech who had been preparing Alana's prescription was now standing frozen, watching the scene unfold with wide, horrified eyes. Another car had pulled into the lot, the driver slowing to a crawl to stare. The public spectacle was part of the humiliation. "Step out of the car, ma'am," Thorne ordered. Alana hesitated for a fraction of a second. "On what grounds?" she asked. "On the grounds that you are interfering with a federal investigation," he snapped back. "Now." Alana took one last look at the pharmacy, at the life that was normal just 3 minutes ago. Then, with a deep sense of dread and rising indignation, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of her car. The moment she was clear of the vehicle, Thorne grabbed her arm, spun her around, and clicked the cold, heavy steel of handcuffs around her wrists. The ride to the processing center was a blur of silent, simmering rage. Thorne and his partner, Ramirez, said nothing, leaving Alana alone with her thoughts in the back of the SUV. The facility itself was exactly what one would expect: cold, sterile, and smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and human anxiety. The walls were a dull, institutional gray, the floors polished concrete. There was no warmth here, no humanity. This was a place designed to strip people of their identity and reduce them to a case number. Alana was handed over to 2 processing agents who went about their work with a practiced, detached indifference. She was now just another body to be processed. The humiliation continued. She was ordered to stand against a wall for a mugshot, the flash of the camera searing a moment of profound injustice into her memory. They took her fingerprints, rolling each one in black ink as if she were a common criminal. Then came the inventory of her personal belongings: her purse, her phone, her car keys. They took her simple gold wedding band, a symbol of her 22-year marriage, and dropped it into a small plastic baggie. They took her pharmacist license, the very document that represented decades of hard work and dedication, and cataloged it with the same indifference as a pack of gum. They saw the evidence of a stable professional life, a life of a model citizen, and it meant nothing to them. They were cogs in a machine, and the machine had decided she was an illegal immigrant. Alana sat on a hard plastic bench in a small holding cell, the metal cuffs now removed, but the feeling of them still ghosting around her wrists. The weight of the situation was immense, yet her mind remained clear. Shock had given way to a cold, crystalline anger. She wasn't a victim, she was a plaintiff. She began documenting everything in her mind: the agents' names, the time of the stop, every word that was said, the expressions on the faces of the processing agents. She was no longer just a pharmacist. She was the star witness in a federal case that hadn't been filed yet. She just had to endure the present. Hours crawled by. The initial adrenaline faded, replaced by a weary resolve. Finally, the door to the holding area opened. A man in a supervisor's uniform entered, holding a manila file. He was older than the other agents, in his late 50s, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen it all. His name tag read Miller. He looked at the paperwork, then at Alana, then back at the paperwork. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning horror, crossed his face. "Dr. Alana Bennett?" he asked, his voice cautious. Alana stood up. "Yes." Supervisor Miller's professional composure crumbled. "My God," he whispered, mostly to himself. He had seen the arrest report filed by Thorne, citing an anonymous tip about a woman matching Alana's description involved in suspicious activity. But something about the listed profession, pharmacist, had flagged his attention. It was unusual. He ran her name through a secondary federal database, a step Thorne had been too arrogant to take. In less than 30 seconds, the truth had appeared on his screen in stark, undeniable clarity: Alana Bennett, born in Houston, Texas. A U.S. citizen with no criminal record, a top graduate of her university, and a respected member of the local medical community. In fact, he recognized her name. His own doctor had referred to her as the best pharmacist in the city. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had committed a catastrophic, indefensible violation of a citizen's constitutional rights. The liability was staggering. Miller realized instantly that Agent Thorne hadn't just arrested a citizen. He had potentially ended his own career and opened the agency up to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Supervisor Miller seemed to age a decade in the span of a few seconds. He rushed into the holding area, his face pale. "Dr. Bennett, I am Supervisor David Miller. There has been a terrible mistake. I am so sorry. You are being released immediately." He spoke quickly, a torrent of apologies and explanations pouring out of him. But Alana held up a hand silencing him. The time for apologies was long past. Her shock and fear had been forged into something much harder, much more durable purpose. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Not until I have a printed copy of every single document related to my detainment. The initial anonymous tip, Agent Thorne's report, the processing and inventory forms, everything." Miller stared at her, recognizing the unshakable resolve in her eyes. This woman was not going to be placated by a few sorries. She was building a case. "Of course, Doctor. Absolutely. I'll get them for you right away." He scurried off, barking orders at his subordinates. An hour later, Alana walked out of the Federal Processing Center. She didn't look back. In her hand, she clutched a thick envelope of documents, the first volley in the war to come. She didn't go home. She went to her office, called her husband to tell him she was safe, and then sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and searched for the top civil rights law firm in Texas. The next morning, she wasn't just Dr. Alana Bennett, the trusted local pharmacist. She was the lead plaintiff in Bennett versus United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The lawsuit alleged unlawful seizure, false imprisonment, and a profound violation of her 4th and 14th Amendment rights. The fight had just begun. The case never should have gone to trial. Any sensible government lawyer would have looked at the facts, watched the crystal-clear security footage from the CVS, and immediately pushed for a settlement. But the U.S. Attorney's Office, perhaps pressured by the agency or simply underestimating Alana's resolve, decided to fight. It was a mistake that would cost them dearly. In the courtroom, the pharmacy's security video became the silent, unimpeachable star witness. Played for the jury on a large screen, it showed a calm, professional woman being terrorized by an agent who grew more aggressive with every polite question she asked. The jurors saw Alana Hands, always visible, complying with every order. They saw Agent Thorne, posture hostile, escalating the situation at every turn. But the trial's most dramatic moment came when Agent Thorne himself took the stand. Alana's lawyer, a sharp, methodical woman named Maria Sanchez, began her cross-examination gently. She had Thorne walk the jury through his training, his years of service. Then she moved in for the kill. "Agent Thorne, on what basis did you initiate the stop of my client?" "We had received an anonymous tip," Thorne said confidently. "A tip about what specifically? Suspicious activity involving a woman matching her description in that area." "What was the suspicious activity, Agent Thorne?" Sanchez pressed. He shifted in his seat. "The tip was vague. It just said suspicious." "So you had no specific articulable facts that a crime was being committed, is that correct?" Her uncooperative attitude gave me reasonable suspicion. "Agent Thorne," Sanchez said, her voice dropping, "is it not true that asking what is the legal basis for this stop is a constitutional right, not a sign of being uncooperative?" He had no answer. Then Sanchez produced his records. Over the past 2 years, 87% of Agent Thorne's anonymous tip stops involved Black or Hispanic citizens. Of those stops, less than 5% resulted in the discovery of an actual immigration violation. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't law enforcement. It was a fishing expedition fueled by racial bias. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. Alana sat beside her lawyer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. She had endured the depositions, the trial, the thinly veiled accusations from government lawyers. She had relived her humiliation 100 times. Now it came down to this. The clerk read the verdict, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. On the count of unlawful seizure and false imprisonment, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Alana Bennett. A quiet gasp went through the courtroom. We award damages in the amount of $8,300,000. The sum was stunning. It was a clear, unambiguous rebuke of not just one agent's actions, but of the system that allowed them to happen. In the aftermath, the consequences were swift. Agent Mark Thorne was fired. His conduct triggered a larger Department of Justice investigation into the practices of his entire field office. That investigation would later lead to sweeping federally mandated reforms, including new training on constitutional rights and implicit bias. The regional director was reassigned. The shockwaves were felt all the way up the chain of command. But for Alana, the victory was never about the money. In a press conference on the courthouse steps, she stood with her husband and her lawyer and announced her plans. "This was never about me," she said, her voice steady and strong. "This was about the principle that in the United States of America, your citizenship is not determined by the color of your skin. It is a birthright." She then announced that a significant portion of the settlement would be used to establish the Bennett Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal aid to U.S. citizens who have had their rights violated by immigration authorities. Her ordeal had given her a new purpose. What happened to Dr. Alana Bennett was a profound injustice, but her story serves as a powerful reminder of a deeper truth. She had every advantage. She was educated, articulate, financially stable, and had the mental fortitude to endure the ordeal and see the fight through to the end. But what about the people who don't? What about the landscaper, the construction worker, the nanny who is a citizen but doesn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back when confronted with the same illegal assertion of authority? They are the ones for whom Alana fought. Her case became a beacon, a story of how one person's refusal to be intimidated can expose the rot in a system and force it to reckon with its own failings. The security footage from that CVS parking lot is now a permanent part of training materials for federal law enforcement agencies across the country, a textbook example of what not to do, of how bias and ego can lead to a catastrophic violation of rights. The $8.3 million verdict wasn't just compensation. It was a warning shot, a message that accountability has a price tag. Alana returned to her life to the pharmacy where her community trusted and respected her. The ordeal left a scar, a quiet trauma that would likely never fully fade. But it did not break her. Instead, it revealed a strength she never knew she possessed. Her victory was not just in the courtroom. It was in her unwavering dignity in the face of dehumanization. It was in her decision to take her pain and transform it into a shield for others. Her story underscores that the fight for civil rights isn't a historical event we read about in books. It's a daily, ongoing struggle waged in the most ordinary of places, like a pharmacy drive-thru on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. It's a fight that depends on the courage of ordinary people to stand up and demand that the promises of the Constitution apply to everyone equally. What part of Dr. Bennett's story resonated with you the most? Do you believe that large financial penalties are the most effective way to force systemic change in government agencies? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these stories of justice are important and need to be told, please hit that subscribe button to support our channel.
Turn off the engine and step out. Now.
I'm active loading, picking up my brother. I'm not violating anything.
A black man in a $90,000 SUV? Yeah, I don't buy that. Hand me your ID.
I'm Commander Marcus Sterling, U.S. Navy. If you keep this up, you're making a serious mistake.
Officer Derek Vance had been patrolling the loop at Metro International Airport for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the taxpayers $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, aggressive, and possessed that dangerous combination of arrogance and ignorance that inevitably leads to disaster. It was a bright, chaotic Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the exhaust fumes mix with the humidity to create a thick gray haze over the terminal. Vance was watching the traffic flow, or rather he was hunting. He wasn't looking for terrorists or safety hazards. He was looking for people who didn't fit his picture of who belonged in the priority pickup lane. And when he saw the pristine black luxury SUV idling near the Terminal 3 exit, his bias kicked in before his brain did. Behind the wheel was Commander Marcus Sterling, a 22-year veteran of the United States Navy, a man who had coordinated logistics for carrier strike groups and managed multi-billion-dollar supply chains. But Vance didn't see a commander. He saw a black man in a $90,000 vehicle, and he decided right then and there that a crime was in progress. Before we get into the details of this egregious abuse of power, take a second to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We cover these stories because accountability matters, and if you believe in justice, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep the spotlight on the truth. The arrivals loop at Metro International is a high-stress environment by design. Cars jockey for position travelers, drag luggage across crosswalks, and the whistle of traffic enforcement officers cuts through the roar of jet engines. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was glaring off the asphalt. Commander Sterling had pulled his vehicle, a 2024 GMC Yukon Denali, to the curb in the designated active loading zone. He wasn't parked. The engine was running. His foot was on the brake, and his eyes were scanning the sliding glass doors for his younger brother, a diplomatic attaché returning from a 3-year post in Brussels. Sterling was a man of precision. At 45 years old, he carried himself with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who has commanded thousands of sailors. He was dressed in civilian attire, a crisp polo shirt and slacks, but the military bearing was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. His haircut was regulation, his posture erect, his situational awareness sharp. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what citizens are allowed to do. But Officer Derek Vance didn't see military bearing. Vance had a history, a file that was thick with citizen contacts that skirted the line of harassment. His supervisors called him proactive. The community called him a menace. He had a specific trigger high-end vehicles driven by men of color. In his distorted view of reality, a black man in a luxury SUV at the airport was either an unlicensed taxi driver hustling for fares or a drug courier moving product. It never occurred to him that the man might be a doctor, a lawyer, or a senior military officer. Vance sat in his cruiser 3 cars back watching Sterling. He saw Sterling check his watch. He saw him tap the steering wheel. To Vance, these weren't signs of a brother waiting for a delayed flight. They were furtive movements. Vance muttered to himself, convinced he had spotted a predator in his territory. He threw the cruiser into drive, didn't bother with the lights, and pulled up aggressively behind the Yukon, blocking it in. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, already deciding how this encounter was going to end. Commander Sterling watched the officer approach in his side mirror. He didn't panic. He had no reason to. He had spent 2 decades in high-pressure zones where panic could get people killed. He assumed the officer was just moving traffic along. He rolled down his window as Vance marched up to the driver's side, his hand resting ominously near his holstered weapon, a tactical intimidation move that was completely unnecessary for a traffic check. Sterling turned his head, ready to explain that his passenger was walking out the door any second. "Good morning, officer," Sterling said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm just waiting on a passenger. He's at baggage claim carousel 4. He expected a nod, maybe a Move it along if he's not here in 2 minutes. Instead, he was met with hostility that seemed personal from the first syllable. Turn off the engine and give me your license and registration, Vance barked, leaning down to peer into the vehicle, his eyes darting around the immaculate leather interior. You've been idling here for 10 minutes. This is a loading zone, not a parking lot for soliciting fares. Sterling blinked, processing the accusation. Officer, I've been here for less than 3 minutes, and I'm not soliciting fares. This is my personal vehicle. I'm picking up my brother. Vance sneered, a look of utter disbelief crossing his face. Your personal vehicle. Right. A $90,000 truck. You expect me to believe you just bought this to pick up family? The insinuation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Vance wasn't asking a question. He was making an accusation about Sterling's financial legitimacy based solely on his race. Sterling felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the frustration of having his achievements erased by someone else's prejudice, but he kept his cool. Discipline was his profession. Officer, I am not required to explain my finances to you, but yes, this is my vehicle. I am not a taxi service. I am not a rideshare. I am a private citizen picking up a family member. Vance stepped back, hand still hovering near his belt. I told you to turn off the engine. You're loitering in a secure area. Step out of the car. This was the turning point. A lawful order must be based on a lawful premise. Sterling knew the regulations. He wasn't obstructing traffic. He wasn't unattended. Officer, I am in compliance with airport regulations for active loading. If I turn off the car, I am parking, which is a violation. I am remaining active. If you need to see identification, I will provide it, but I am not stepping out of the vehicle. Vance's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He wasn't used to people knowing the rules better than he did, and he certainly wasn't used to a black man speaking to him with such authoritative calm. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Step out of the vehicle now, or I will remove you. We have a problem with illegal solicitors here, and you fit the profile. Sterling realized then that this wasn't about traffic flow. This was about dominance. He knew he had to document this. I am going to reach for my wallet. Sterling narrated his movements, slowly keeping his hands visible. I am going to show you my identification, which proves who I am. Vance tensed but didn't stop him. Sterling reached into his back pocket and withdrew his wallet. He didn't pull out a standard state driver's license first. He pulled out his U.S. Navy Common Access card, his military ID, and his distinct laminated commission card which identified him as a commander in the United States Navy. He held them out the window. I am Commander Marcus Sterling, United States Navy. I am an active duty officer. I am asking you to look at these credentials and lower your tone. Vance snatched the cards from Sterling's hand. He looked at the CAC card, the chip, the hologram, the rank insignia. It was a federal document property of the U.S. government. To a trained eye, it commanded respect. To Officer Derek Vance, who had never served a day in a uniform other than his own, it looked like a prop. He let out a short, derisive laugh. Commander, you. Vance scoffed, shaking his head. Buddy, I can buy one of these on the internet for $50. You think I haven't seen fake military IDs before? This just makes it worse. Impersonating an officer, that's a felony. Sterling remained stone-faced, though his internal alarm bells were ringing. Officer, that is a valid Department of Defense identification. If you doubt it, you are required to verify it with your dispatch or the Shore Patrol liaison. Do not confiscate that ID. Vance ignored him. He pocketed the ID cards. I'm not calling anyone for a fake ID. Get out of the car, now. The situation had escalated past the point of return. Vance was now operating on confirmation bias so strong it blinded him to reality. He saw a fraud, so the ID had to be fake. He saw a criminal, so the protestations of innocence were just resisting arrest. Sterling knew that if he physically resisted, he could be shot. He made the calculation that every black father teaches his sons to make survive the encounter, fight the battle in court. I am unbuckling my seatbelt. Sterling said, loudly, ensuring the officer's body camera, which he prayed was recording, picked up the audio. "I am complying with your order under duress. I am a senior naval officer, and you are making a grave mistake." Vance yanked the door open before Sterling could even finish unbuckling. He grabbed the commander by the arm and hauled him out of the SUV. The scene immediately drew attention. Travelers on the sidewalk stopped. Phones came out. A woman in a business suit gasped. "What is he doing? That man wasn't doing anything." Vance didn't care. He spun Sterling around and shoved him against the side of the polished black Yukon. "Hands behind your back! Stop resisting!" Vance shouted, performing for the audience, even though Sterling was standing perfectly still. His muscles relaxed, offering zero resistance. "I am not resisting," Sterling said, clearly, his voice projecting to the bystanders. "I am Commander Marcus Sterling. This officer is arresting me without cause." The click of the handcuffs was audible over the traffic noise. Vance ratcheted them tight, punishingly tight. "You're under arrest for loitering, soliciting without a permit, and possession of forged government documents." Vance recited, feeling a surge of triumph. He thought he had just made the bust of the month. He thought he had caught a high-level con artist. He had no idea he was currently manhandling a man with high-level security clearance who was responsible for the movement of nuclear assets. Vance patted him down, roughly pulling his car keys and phone. "Tow it!" Vance yelled to a traffic aide nearby. "Full impound. Search it for inventory." Sterling's heart sank, not for himself, but for the vehicle. Inside his briefcase in the back seat were logistics manifests, unclassified but sensitive documents regarding fleet supply chains. "Officer," Sterling said, his voice low and urgent. "There are sensitive government documents in that vehicle. You do not have the clearance to view them. If that car is impounded, you are creating a national security incident." Vance laughed again, pushing Sterling toward the patrol car. "Yeah, sure. Nuclear codes, right? Save it for the judge, buddy. Get in." He shoved a decorated commander of the U.S. Navy into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of a squad car like a common drunk. As they pulled away, Sterling looked out the window and saw his brother, luggage in hand, stepping out of the terminal, looking around in confusion for the ride that would never show up. The drive to the airport substation was short, but for Sterling, it was an exercise in mental cataloging. He memorized the time, the route, the officer's badge number, 894, and every procedural error Vance had committed. Vance, meanwhile, was radioing ahead, his voice brimming with unearned confidence. "Bringing in 1 male charges of forgery and resisting. Impounded his vehicle. Guys trying to play the 'do you know who I am' card." The dispatcher acknowledged, unaware of the storm that was coming. When they arrived at the precinct, Vance hauled Sterling out and marched him through the back door, parading his trophy past the holding cells to the processing desk. Sitting behind the high desk was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a former Marine who was counting down the days to retirement. He had seen it all, and he had a low tolerance for nonsense. He looked up as Vance dragged Sterling in. Miller's eyes narrowed. He didn't look at the handcuffs. He looked at the man wearing them. He saw the posture. He saw the haircut. He saw the eyes. Miller stood up slowly. "What do you have, Vance?" Miller asked, his tone cautious. "Illegal solicitor at Terminal 3, Vance announced, proudly tossing Sterling's wallet and the fake IDs onto the counter. "Refused to move, driving a $90,000 truck he obviously can't afford, then tried to pass off this garbage." He pointed to the CAC card. "Claims he's a Navy commander, fake ID." Miller picked up the CAC card. He felt the weight of it. He looked at the chip. He looked at the expiration date. He looked at the photo, then at the man in cuffs. Miller's face drained of color. He had carried a card just like this for 4 years, though his was green for enlisted. He knew exactly what a real one looked and felt like. This was real. He looked at the commission card. Real. "Vance," Miller said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was scarier than a shout. "Take those cuffs off, right now." Vance blinked. Sarge, he's a suspect. The ID is fake. I said, Miller roared, slamming his hand on the desk. Take the damn cuffs off him. That is a common access card, you moron. This man is a commissioned officer. Vance froze. The confidence evaporated, replaced by a sudden sickening doubt. He fumbled for his keys. Sterling stood silently as the cuffs were removed. He rubbed his wrists where the metal had bitten into his skin. He looked at Sergeant Miller. Thank you, Sergeant, Sterling said calmly. I am Commander Sterling. My vehicle has been impounded. It contains government property. I need to contact the Judge Advocate General's office immediately. Miller came around the desk, ignoring Vance completely. Commander, I apologize. I sincerely apologize. We will get your vehicle back immediately. Vance, give me your badge and your gun. Vance stepped back. Sarge, I didn't know. He looked like... Like what? Sterling interjected, turning to face Vance for the first time since the arrest. Like a criminal, because I was driving a nice car, because I'm black. Vance had no answer. He stood there stripped of his authority, watching as Miller made the phone call that confirmed everything. The Department of Defense liaison confirmed Commander Sterling's status within 30 seconds. The airport police chief was on the phone 2 minutes later. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a processing center to a disaster management zone. Vance was escorted out of the room not as an officer, but as a liability. But the damage was already done. The bystanders at the airport hadn't stopped recording when the patrol car left. The videos were already uploading. By 2 p.m., the first video hit Twitter. By 4 p.m., it was trending globally. The visual was impossible to ignore: a polite, well-dressed black man being manhandled by a young, aggressive white cop, while calmly stating he was a Navy commander. The internet detectives went to work. They identified Vance. They identified Sterling. The narrative was devastating. American hero arrested for picking up brother. Racist cop ignores military ID. The local news stations picked up the story, filing FOIA requests for the body cam footage immediately. Because it was a high-profile incident involving a federal officer, the department released the footage within 24 hours to get ahead of the story. The body cam footage was the nail in the coffin. It showed everything the bystanders missed. It showed the initial approach. It captured the audio of Vance sneering, "How can you afford this?" It captured the laughter when Sterling showed his ID. It revealed the complete lack of provocation. There was no "he said, she said." It was 4K definition of racial profiling. The internal affairs investigation, usually a slow process, was expedited. They opened Vance's file and found what they should have seen years ago: dozens of stops of black and Latino men in luxury cars. Suspected drug activity, noted on reports where no drugs were ever found. Warning issued for infractions that didn't exist. Vance had been hunting minority drivers for sport, and his supervisors had looked the other way because his ticket numbers were high. But you can't look the other way when the victim is a commander in the United States Navy. The Navy wasn't just angry. They were involved. The Judge Advocate General's office communicated directly with the city attorney. The message was clear: this was a violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and a disgrace to the uniform. The city didn't even try to fight it. They knew a jury would look at Commander Sterling, a man who had served his country for 2 decades, and then look at Officer Vance, and they would award a verdict that would bankrupt the department. The settlement was reached in record time, $6.5 million. It was one of the largest payouts for a single incident of wrongful arrest in the city's history. But the money wasn't the headline. The headline was the systemic purge that followed. Derek Vance was fired 6 weeks after the incident. His arbitration hearing was short. The union didn't even fight hard to keep him. The video was indefensible. His certification was revoked, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again in the state. The sergeant who had signed off on Vance's previous evaluations was demoted. The policy for verifying federal IDs was rewritten nationwide. Commander Sterling donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for veterans of color who had been targeted by police. At the city council hearing where the new oversight policies were signed into law, Sterling spoke. He didn't wear his uniform. He wore a suit. He stood at the podium, the same calm, disciplined man who had stared down an armed officer at the airport. "I stand here today not because I am special," Sterling told the silent room. "I stand here because I had a rank that Officer Vance couldn't ignore once the handcuffs were off. But I ask you, what if I had been a teacher? What if I had been a carpenter? What if I had been just a brother, picking up a brother? Would I still be sitting in a cell? The dignity of a citizen should not depend on the rank on their ID card. It should be inherent. Officer Vance didn't see a commander. He didn't even see a man. He saw a stereotype. And until we root that out, no badge, no uniform, and no amount of money will make us safe." Sterling's words resonated far beyond the hearing. The incident became a case study in police academies across the country. The Sterling Standard teaching officers that bias is not just a moral failing. It is a professional liability that can destroy lives and departments. Derek Vance is now working in sales for a landscaping supply company. He refuses to speak to the media. Commander Sterling retired from the Navy 2 years later with full honors. He now runs a logistics consultancy and mentors young officers, but he still feels a tightening in his chest whenever he sees blue lights in his rearview mirror, because he knows that to some people, his service, his sacrifice, and his rank will never matter as much as the color of his skin. This story forces us to ask the hard questions. Why are we still hiring officers who view the public as enemy combatants? Why did it take a Navy commander to expose a pattern of behavior that had been going on for years? And most importantly, how many Derek Vances are still out there patrolling our streets right now? We need to hear your thoughts. Do you think officers who profile drivers based on their cars should face criminal charges, not just firing? And should there be a federal do not hire list for cops like Vance? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. The more we talk about these injustices, the harder it becomes for them to hide in the dark. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.